You've seen birds your entire life, in gardens, parks, on sidewalks, and in the trees around your neighborhood. Probably not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands over the years. Now think about this. How many dead birds have you actually seen? Maybe one, maybe two, maybe none at all. Which is strange, because birds die every single day. By the millions. Disease, predators, hunger, old age, accidents. Wild bird mortality is extremely high. Studies estimate that nearly 50% of songbirds never survive their first year. That means for every sparrow you saw in your yard this morning, statistically, about half of its siblings from last year are already gone. So where did they go? Where are the bodies? This isn't a small mystery. It's actually one of the most common questions in ornithology, and the answer is much more specific and much stranger than most people expect. Welcome to today's video. If you're new, remember to subscribe to the channel because what you're about to learn will change the way you understand every bird that visits your yard. Today, we're exploring why you almost never find dead birds and what happens during the final hours of a bird's life. Stay until the end, because researchers have recently documented behaviors that suggest some bird species may show something surprisingly close to an awareness of death. But first, consider the scale of this mystery. A 2019 study published in Science found that annual mortality rates for adult songbirds range from 40% to 60%, depending on species. That means billions of birds die every year in North America alone. And although total numbers vary in places like Spain, the proportions remain similar. Sparrows, robins, blackbirds, pigeons, swallows. The birds you see every day all disappear at roughly the same rate. If even a small percentage of those bodies stayed visible for a few hours, you would see dead birds everywhere. In gardens, on sidewalks, in parks, on streets. But you don't. Statistically, you should have seen far more than you actually have. So why haven't you? So, what's really happening? The answer has several parts, and the first is simple. Birds usually don't die where you're looking. When a bird becomes sick, injured, or weakened by age, its behavior changes in very specific ways. Studies on avian illnesses, including West Nile virus and avian influenza, show that sick birds often become lethargic, disoriented, and most importantly, they seek cover. Healthy birds stay in open or semi-open areas where they can detect predators and escape quickly. But a weakened bird that can no longer react or fly properly moves toward dense shelter, thick bushes, tall grass, low vegetation, the base of hedges, places where predators are less likely to find them. This isn't a planned decision. It's instinct. A bird that can no longer escape hides itself, and the place it chooses in its final hours often becomes the place where it dies. That's why you almost never see dead birds out in the open. They're not dying where you look. They're dying where you rarely pay attention. Inside dense vegetation and overgrown spaces you walk past every day. If you could look beneath every thick bush in your neighborhood, you'd probably find more dead birds than you expect. But most people never do. So the bodies remain unseen. Not because they disappeared, but because they were hidden from the start. But hiding isn't the whole answer. Even when birds die in visible places, on lawns, sidewalks, or driveways, they disappear quickly. Studies on scavenger activity in urban and suburban environments show that a small bird carcass usually remains visible for only 30 minutes to 4 hours. That's all. And if the bird dies at night, when many weakened birds do because their metabolism can no longer maintain body temperature, The process begins long before morning arrives. Often, the body is gone before you even wake up. And the animals removing bird remains usually aren't what people imagine. Most people think of vultures or large predators, but many of the real scavengers are smaller and far more common. Ants, beetles, and flies can begin feeding within minutes during warm weather. Under the right conditions, insects alone may strip soft tissue in only a few hours, but some of the fastest scavengers are animals. People rarely think about cats. Scientific evidence on this is very clear. A study published in Nature Communications estimated that outdoor domestic cats kill billions of birds each year. And those numbers don't include birds that were already dead when cats found them. Because cats don't only hunt, they also scavenge. Spain has roughly 5 million domestic cats. Mexico has more than 6 million. Argentina and Chile have several million more. While exact bird mortality estimates vary by country, biologists agree on one thing: the impact is enormous, and most of it happens unseen. A dead or dying bird on the ground becomes an easy target. Cats patrol their territories regularly, often during the night. A bird may be lying on a sidewalk at 3 a.m. and be completely gone before sunrise. You wake up and never knew it was there. And cats aren't the only ones. In Spain, scavengers include martens, foxes, badgers, and hedgehogs. In countries like Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and Colombia, opossums, raccoons, and skunks play a similar role. Magpies and crows also remove carcasses. Even squirrels have been observed feeding on dead birds for protein, especially during winter when food is scarce. The efficiency of these scavenger networks is so high that researchers studying bird mortality often need to inspect the same locations several times a day. Otherwise, the evidence can disappear before it's even recorded. But there's another part of this story, a less obvious one, and perhaps a more unsettling one. Some birds leave no body behind because they're consumed before death fully arrives. Predation is one of the leading causes of death among wild birds. And by nature, predation rarely leaves visible remains. A sparrowhawk may catch a sparrow or blue tit in midair. No body falls where people can see it. The bird is carried to a perch, eaten, and the indigestible remains, feathers and bones, are dropped far from where anyone walks. A goshawk may strike a pigeon or turtle dove at a feeding station. You might only see a sudden burst of feathers in the air. By the time you step outside, both predator and prey are already gone. Only a few feathers remain on the grass, and even those don't stay long. Within an hour, wind may scatter them, or other birds may collect them to build nests. The signs of death disappear almost as quickly as death itself. And this happens everywhere. In villages across Spain, in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, in neighborhoods throughout Mexico City. Anywhere with open sky and enough vegetation, birds of prey are constantly hunting. And birds are disappearing without leaving much behind. And owls are even more efficient. A great horned owl, barn owl, or little owl hunts in darkness, often taking birds while they sleep. The attack happens unseen. The owl may swallow the bird whole or in large pieces, then later regurgitate feathers and bones, sometimes miles away from the hunting site. You never see the bird. You never witness the hunt. Only a small pellet may remain beneath a distant tree, and most people walk past it without noticing. When you combine three factors, dying birds, hiding themselves, scavengers removing remains quickly, and predators leaving almost no visible trace, the odds of finding a dead bird drop dramatically. You would have to be in the right place, at the right moment. during the brief window between death and disappearance, and looking exactly where it happened. That combination is rare, so the feeling that you almost never see dead birds is accurate, not because birds aren't dying, but because nature removes the evidence incredibly fast. And this brings us to the most surprising part of the story, something science has only started understanding over the last 15 years. For years, ornithologists believed birds had no concept of death and lacked the cognitive ability to understand mortality. But newer research has complicated that idea, especially in corvids, crows, magpies, and jays. In 2015, researchers at the University of Washington documented something unexpected. When crows found another dead crow, they didn't ignore it. They gathered. Sometimes dozens arrived, calling loudly, circling overhead, perching nearby, and staying for 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes longer. The behavior appeared repeatedly across different crow populations, and they weren't reacting to a predator. They were reacting to the dead crow itself. Then researchers asked an even more surprising question. Would those crows later return to places where they had found one of their own dead? The crows didn't return. Birds that had taken part in those gatherings avoided the area for weeks, even when it was still part of their territory, even when food was available. The dead crow had changed how that place was perceived. The living birds had learned something from death. They had reassessed the danger around them. This doesn't prove that crows understand death the way humans do, but it does suggest they recognize it as something important. They respond with repeated behaviors, and encountering a dead member of their own species changes future behavior. Other corvids show similar patterns. Magpies have been observed carrying grass and placing it over another dead magpie. The behavior has no obvious survival purpose and can appear surprisingly similar to mourning or even a burial. Researchers remain cautious with words like funeral or grief because those ideas carry human meaning. But one thing is clear. These birds are not ignoring death. They respond in consistent, socially coordinated, and surprisingly complex ways. So maybe your feeling was right all along. You almost never see dead birds. Not because birds aren't dying, but because nature is remarkably efficient at removing the evidence. If you enjoyed this video and want more hidden stories from the natural world, subscribe to the channel and join us for more.